The burning summer. Martha Caldwell's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she stared at the eviction notice nailed to her cabin door. 2 weeks. 14 days to save the ranch her husband died building, or lose everything: the land, the home, her children's future. Behind her, 5-year-old Nell whimpered with hunger. 8-year-old Owen pretended he wasn't afraid. The Montana summer sun beat down mercilessly on cracked earth and dying cattle. No rain, no help, no hope. Then a lone rider appeared on the horizon, dust rising behind a pale horse, and Martha's life tilted toward either salvation or total destruction. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Martha's story travels. And if this opening gripped you, hit that like button and settle in, because what happens next will break your heart before it puts it back together. The heat came first, not the comfortable warmth of spring sunshine or the lazy drowse of an August afternoon. This was the kind of heat that cracked the earth open, that turned green grass to brittle yellow straw, that made the horizon shimmer and dance with cruel mirages of water that didn't exist. The Montana Territory summer of 1883 arrived like a punishment, and it showed no mercy. Martha Caldwell knelt in the dust behind her cabin where the children couldn't see her, pressed her forehead against the rough-hewn logs, and finally let herself break. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel the full weight of it. The impossible choice between feeding her children or keeping the roof over their heads, between her husband's memory and their survival, between pride and begging. The wood was hot against her skin, still radiating the day's brutal heat, even though the sun had started its descent toward the distant mountains. Inside, she could hear Nell singing softly to her corn-husk doll, that made-up song about bluebirds and summer rain. The child's voice was thin, weakened by too many meals of nothing but hard biscuits and creek water. Owen was splitting kindling. She could hear the steady thunk of the hatchet, could picture his small face set in grim determination, trying so hard to be the man of the house at 8 years old. 8 years old. The same age Thomas had been when his own father died. Martha pressed harder against the wood, welcoming the burn, the pain that was at least something she could control. She'd cried herself empty 3 months ago when they'd buried Thomas beside the creek, his body broken from the fall that shouldn't have killed him. A simple accident, his horse spooked by a rattlesnake, a thrown shoe, rough ground. He'd hit his head on a rock, and just like that, 15 years of marriage ended in a grave marked by river stones and wildflowers that had long since wilted in the heat. The ranch had been struggling even before that. 2 years of below-average rainfall, cattle prices dropping, and Thomas's stubborn refusal to borrow money from anyone, especially not from men like Silas Crow. But after the funeral, after the neighbors stopped bringing food and the condolences faded into uncomfortable silence, the reality had settled over Martha like a burial shroud. The well was dropping, the cattle were thin, the garden had burned to nothing despite her daily efforts with precious water. And the mortgage Thomas had taken out 5 years ago to expand the herd, the one he'd sworn he could pay off within 3 years, that debt had somehow transferred to Silas Crow's ledger. She didn't understand how. Thomas had borrowed from the Territorial Bank, not from Crow's private loan operation. But when she'd ridden into town 2 weeks after the funeral to inquire about payment arrangements, she'd been directed to Crow's office above the Mercantile. There, in a room that smelled of cigars and leather and something rotten underneath, Crow had shown her the paperwork. The bank had sold the debt. It was all legal, he'd assured her with a smile that never touched his eyes, all proper and recorded. The amount on the paper had stolen her breath, nearly double what Thomas had said they owed. Interest, Crow had explained, his thick fingers drumming on the mahogany desk, accumulates faster than folks realize. Your late husband, God rest him, was a proud man. Didn't like discussing his business troubles. But numbers don't lie, Mrs. Caldwell. She'd tried to negotiate, tried to explain that she just needed time, that she could make payments if he'd just extend the terms. She had cattle, not many, but some. She could sell them, could work, could find a way. Crow had leaned back in his chair, regarding her with the expression of a man examining livestock at auction. I'm a reasonable businessman, Mrs. Caldwell. I'll give you 60 days from your husband's death to settle the debt in full. That's more generous than most would offer a woman in your circumstances. 60 days. As of yesterday, she had 14 left. Martha pushed away from the cabin wall, swiped roughly at her face, and straightened her spine. She'd allowed herself this moment of weakness, this brief surrender to despair. Now she had to be strong again. Had to figure out what came next. She walked around to the front of the cabin, squinting against the lowering sun. The ranch spread before her in all its sun-scorched misery. The sagging barn that needed new shingles, the corral fence with 3 posts leaning at dangerous angles, the chicken coop she'd tried to repair with scrap wood and hope. Beyond that, the pasture where 24 cattle grazed on grass so sparse you could count the blades. Thomas had once run 60 head on this land. Now she'd be lucky to get enough for the remaining animals to cover a month's worth of food. The creek still ran, though barely. A thin silver thread winding through the property, fed by snowmelt from mountains that seemed impossibly distant in the heat haze. It was the creek that had made Thomas fall in love with this land 7 years ago, when they'd left Ohio seeking a fresh start in the territories. Good water, good grass, room to grow, he'd said, his eyes bright with dreams. We'll build something here, Martha, something that lasts. She'd believed him. She'd believed in him, in the dream, in the idea that hard work and determination could conquer anything. The sun caught something on the cabin door, and Martha's stomach clenched. The notice. She'd torn it down this morning, crumpled it in her fist, thrown it in the stove, but she couldn't burn away the words, couldn't erase the deadline. Final notice. Payment in full required. Failure to comply will result in seizure of property and assets. Mama? She turned to find Owen standing in the doorway, the hatchet still in his hand, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He looked so much like Thomas, the same dark hair that wouldn't lie flat, the same serious brown eyes, the same stubborn set to his jaw. But where Thomas had carried confidence, Owen carried fear poorly disguised as bravado. What is it, sweetheart? We're almost out of kindling, and I think maybe we shouldn't use so much wood, for cooking, I mean. He ducked his head, embarrassed. It's hot anyway. We don't need hot food. Martha's heart cracked a little more. 8 years old, and already trying to solve problems that should never touch a child. We'll manage the wood, she said gently. You've done good work today. Why don't you wash up for supper? What are we having? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. They both knew there wasn't much, some cornmeal, a few eggs if the chickens had laid, though the heat had them off their schedule, some wild onions she'd dug up yesterday. Something good, Martha lied. Go on now. Owen nodded and disappeared back inside. Martha heard him talking to Nell, his voice taking on an artificial brightness that twisted like a knife in her chest. Her children were going hungry, going without, watching their world collapse, and she couldn't stop it. She walked toward the well, needing to check the water level, even though she already knew it would be lower than yesterday. The bucket came up half full, the water cloudy with sediment. She stood there holding the rope, staring down into the darkness below, and let herself imagine for just a moment what it would be like to give up, to walk away, to take the children and leave, find work in town, let Crow have the land and the debt and the memories. But where would they go? She had no family, no connections. Thomas had been an orphan, raised by an uncle who died before they married. Her own parents had disowned her when she'd chosen Thomas over the banker's son they'd selected for her. This ranch, this failing piece of Montana earth, was all they had. A sound drifted across the prairie, hoofbeats, distant but drawing closer. Martha's hand went instinctively to the rifle propped beside the well. Visitors were rare out here, and in her experience, people who came unannounced brought trouble. She waited, watching the horizon, as a single rider materialized from the heat shimmer. He rode a pale horse, dun-colored and trail-worn, moving at a steady walk that spoke of long miles covered. The man himself was dusty from hat to boots, his features obscured by the angle of the sun behind him. As he drew closer, Martha could make out more details. A lean build, broad shoulders, the kind of stillness in the saddle that came from years of riding. A bedroll tied behind the saddle, saddlebags that looked half empty, no visible weapons except for what might be hidden beneath his duster. The rider stopped about 30 yards out, far enough to show he understood property boundaries and caution. "Ma'am," his voice carried across the distance, low and rough with trail dust. Don't mean to intrude. Saw your place from the ridge, wondered if you might have work for a man willing to do it. Martha raised the rifle just enough for him to see it. We're not hiring. Didn't ask for wages. He shifted slightly in the saddle, and Martha tensed, but he was just adjusting his hat against the sun. Just work, food, and a place to sleep would be payment enough. I said we're not hiring. Behind her, the cabin door opened. She didn't have to look to know Owen had heard the stranger's voice, had grabbed his father's old rifle, was probably pointing it in the general direction of the rider. The weapon was too heavy for the boy, the barrel wavering despite his best efforts, but the stranger didn't need to know that. The rider seemed to notice Owen, and something shifted in his posture. Not fear, but a kind of careful respect. I can see you've got things handled here, he said. But I've got a good eye for what a place needs, and ma'am, no offense intended, but you've got about 3 days before that corral fence goes down completely. Then you'll be chasing cattle across the territory. And your barn roof, you get one good wind, you'll lose half those shingles. Martha's jaw tightened. I'm aware of my own property's condition. Didn't say you weren't. He paused, and Martha thought she could see something like understanding in his shadowed face. But awareness and hands to fix it are different things. I've got the hands. I'm good with wood, good with animals, know my way around a ranch. Could have those repairs done in a few days. All I'm asking for is meals and maybe a corner of that barn to sleep in. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended. Why would you work for nothing? The rider was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped, become something more honest. Because I've been on the other side of it. The barely holding on side. The one more bad day from losing everything side. And back then, someone helped me when they didn't have to. I'm just passing that forward. Martha wanted to refuse, and every instinct screamed that letting a stranger onto her property, around her children, was dangerous. She knew nothing about this man, where he came from, what he was running from, what he might want beyond the work he offered. But she also knew he was right about the fence, right about the barn, right about her inability to fix everything that was breaking faster than she could patch it together. You got a name? She asked. Cole Ryder. I'm Martha Caldwell. That's my son Owen behind me and my daughter Nell inside. I won't have cursing around my children, I won't have drinking, and if I find you've touched anything that's not yours or acted in any way that makes me uncomfortable, you'll leave immediately. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Martha lowered the rifle slightly. Barn's through there. Find yourself a spot that's not full of hay or tools. Supper's in an hour. If you're still here then, you can eat with us. After that, we'll talk about what work needs doing. Cole Ryder touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement and guided his horse toward the barn. Martha watched him go, her finger still resting near the rifle's trigger, her mind already questioning the decision. Owen came to stand beside her, his own rifle finally lowered. Mama, is that safe? Letting him stay? I don't know, baby. She put her arm around her son's thin shoulders. But safe's a luxury we might not be able to afford right now. They stood together, watching as Cole dismounted and began unsaddling his horse with the easy competence of a man who'd done it 10,000 times. The pale horse shook itself, dust rising in a cloud, and Martha thought she saw Cole run a gentle hand down its neck, speaking words too quiet to hear. Inside the cabin, Nell started singing again, that same made-up song about bluebirds. Martha closed her eyes and prayed she hadn't just invited disaster onto her failing ranch. But prayer felt thin these days, stretched too tight over too much need. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Martha of fire. The heat refused to break, and somewhere in town, Silas Crow sat in his office above the mercantile, counting down the days until he could claim one more piece of Montana territory for his growing empire. Martha had 14 days left. She had 2 children, a dying ranch, and now a stranger in her barn who'd offered to work for nothing but food and shelter. It wasn't enough. It couldn't possibly be enough. But it was something, and these days something was all she had to hold on to. She turned toward the cabin, pulling Owen with her. Come on, let's see about supper. As they walked, she didn't look back at the barn. Didn't let herself wonder too hard about Cole Ryder or his reasons for stopping here. Wondering was another luxury she couldn't afford. But that night, after she'd served a meal of cornmeal mush and fried eggs that didn't go far enough between 4 people, after she'd watched Cole eat in careful silence at the far end of the table, after she'd put the children to bed and stood in the doorway of her cabin looking out at the darkening prairie. That night, Martha Caldwell allowed herself the smallest flicker of something that might have been hope. It died quickly, smothered by practicality and experience, but for a moment it had been there. And in the barn, Cole Ryder lay in the hayloft with his saddle for a pillow, staring up through the gaps in the roof where stars showed through, and wondered if he'd finally found the place where running could stop. The heat held through the night, thick and oppressive. Tomorrow would bring more sun, more thirst, more slow deterioration of everything Martha was fighting to keep. But tomorrow would also bring work, repairs, the sound of a hammer and the smell of fresh-cut wood. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of something neither of them could see yet, a collision course between a widow fighting for survival, a drifter seeking redemption, and a powerful man who'd built his empire on the suffering of others. The burning summer had only just begun. The first sound Martha heard the next morning was the rhythmic strike of hammer against nail, steady and sure as a heartbeat. She woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting why that sound felt wrong, then remembered. The stranger, Cole Ryder. She'd let him stay. Dawnlight filtered through the cabin's single window, pale and already promising heat. Martha rose quickly, her body protesting the thin mattress and too many nights of restless sleep. Through the wavy glass, she could see Cole already at work on the corral fence, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his movements efficient and practiced. He'd started without asking, without waiting for direction or permission. Martha wasn't sure if that irritated her or relieved her. She dressed quickly, splashed water on her face from the basin, and braided her hair with fingers that knew the pattern by memory. In the other room, the children still slept. Owen sprawled across his narrow bed, Nell curled tight with her corn-husk doll. Martha let them rest. There'd be time enough for them to wake to another day of heat and hunger. Outside, the morning air already carried the promise of scorching temperatures. The sun hadn't fully cleared the horizon, but its approach painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Cole worked with his back to her, driving a new post into ground that looked hard as iron. Where he'd gotten the post, Martha couldn't imagine, then saw he'd scavenged it from the collapsed section of fence on the property's north side, the part Thomas had always meant to repair but never found time for. "You're up early," she said. Cole turned, no surprise in his expression, as if he'd known she was there all along. "Old habit. Best work gets done before the heat sets in. I didn't say you could start on the fence." "You didn't say I couldn't." He set the hammer down, pulled a bandana from his pocket, and wiped his face. "Figured you'd rather wake up to work done than promises made." Martha couldn't argue with that logic, though something in her wanted to. She'd lived too long with Thomas's unfulfilled promises to trust words over action. "You have breakfast yet?" "No, ma'am. Didn't want to presume." "There's coffee if you want it. Not much else until later." Cole nodded and followed her into the cabin, moving carefully, like a man aware of his own size in small spaces. He took the same seat he'd occupied last night, at the far end of the rough-hewn table, leaving the positions closer to the bedroom door for the children when they woke. Martha poured coffee, made from grounds she'd already used twice, weak and bitter, and set the cup in front of him. He wrapped his hands around it but didn't drink right away, just let the heat seep into his palms. "How long you been on your own out here?" he asked. 3 months. My husband died in April." "I'm sorry." The words were simple, unadorned by platitudes or false comfort. Something in their plainness made them feel true. "The ranch was struggling before," Martha heard herself say, not sure why she was offering this information to a stranger. 2 dry years, cattle prices down. Thomas worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep us afloat. Then one day his horse threw him, and that was that. 3 seconds, and 15 years of marriage ended. Cole was quiet, his eyes on his coffee. "Grief's a hard trail to walk." "You speak from experience?" "Everyone does, eventually." He finally took a sip, didn't flinch at the bitter weakness of it. "This ranch means something to you beyond the land?" Martha looked around the cabin, at the table Thomas had built from lodgepole pine, at the rocking chair where she'd nursed both babies, at the worn floorboards that showed the path between stove and table and door. "It's the only home my children have ever known. Owen was born in that bedroom. Nell, too. Every mark on these walls is a memory. Thomas's first attempt at hanging shelves. The height marks where I measured the children every birthday. The spot where Nell practiced writing her letters and gouged the wood with the pencil. So you'll fight to keep it? It wasn't a question, but Martha answered anyway. Until there's nothing left to fight with. The bedroom door opened and Owen emerged, his hair sticking up in directions gravity shouldn't allow. He stopped when he saw Cole at the table, his hand moving instinctively toward where the rifle leaned against the wall. "It's all right," Martha said. "Mr. Ryder's already been working on the fence. Come have some coffee." Owen approached warily, taking his usual seat but keeping his eyes on Cole. "I can help with the fence." "I'm sure you can," Cole said. "But I've got it handled for now. You got other chores need doing?" "I split kindling and fetch water and feed the chickens." "That's good work. Important work. Ranch won't run without it." Something in Owen's posture relaxed slightly at being taken seriously. He poured himself half a cup of coffee. Martha allowed it because he cut it with water and she'd already fought too many battles over small dignities, and drank it in silence. Nell appeared next, her nightdress wrinkled, her corn-husk doll clutched in one fist. She stopped in the doorway staring at Cole with the unfiltered curiosity of a 5-year-old. "Who's that?" "This is Mr. Ryder," Martha said. "He's going to be helping around the ranch for a few days." "Why?" "Because there's work that needs doing." "Oh." Nell climbed into her chair, set her doll carefully on the table. "Are you going to stay forever?" Cole's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Just a few days, little miss." "Owen says we're going to lose the ranch. He says a bad man is going to take it away." "Nell?" Owen's face flushed red. "You weren't supposed to tell anyone that." "But it's true, isn't it? That's what you said." "You said, that's enough." Martha's voice came out sharper than she intended. Both children fell silent, Nell's eyes filling with tears, Owen staring down at his coffee with fierce concentration. Martha took a breath, forced herself to soften. "Mr. Ryder doesn't need to hear about our private business." But Cole's expression had changed, something hardening around his eyes. "This bad man got a name?" Martha hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding what would become common knowledge soon enough. "Silas Crow. He holds the mortgage on this place, says we owe more than we can pay, and he's given me 14 days, 13 now to settle the debt, or he takes everything." "Crow." Cole said the name like he was tasting something rotten. "Big man? Thick through the middle, wears a gold watch chain, office above the mercantile." "You know him?" "Knew of him. Crow's got a reputation in the territories. Loans money at rates that sound reasonable until you read the fine print. Then the interest compounds, payments get credited wrong, and suddenly folks owe double what they borrowed. By the time they realize what's happened, he owns their land." Cole's jaw tightened. "He's run this game in 4 towns I know of. Always stays just legal enough that the law can't touch him." Martha's stomach turned cold. "Thomas borrowed from the territorial bank, not from Crow." "Banks sell debt all the time, especially when someone like Crow makes them an offer. He probably bought your husband's loan for cents on the dollar, then recalculated everything under his own terms. But that's legal, barely, but legal." Cole drained his coffee, set the cup down with controlled precision. "How much does he say you owe?" Martha named the figure. Cole's expression darkened further. "And how much did your husband actually borrow?" She told him. The number was nearly half what Crow claimed. "There it is," Cole said quietly. "The game. He's banking on you not understanding the paperwork, not having money for a lawyer, not having anyone to stand with you when he comes to take what's yours." "Well, he's right, isn't he?" Martha heard the bitterness in her own voice, tasted it like ash. "I don't understand the paperwork. I don't have money for a lawyer, and I certainly don't have anyone to stand with me." Owen's chair scraped back suddenly. "I'll stand with you, Mama. I'm not afraid of Mr. Crow." The boy's voice shook despite the brave words, and Martha's heart broke a little more. "I know you would, baby, but this isn't your fight. Your ranch, your family, makes it your fight." Cole stood, carried his cup to the basin. "With your permission, Mrs. Caldwell, I'd like to ride into town later. Take a look at the papers Crow showed you, if you've got copies. I'm no lawyer, but I've seen enough of these schemes to know what to look for." Why would you do that? Cole turned, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Martha saw something raw in his face, something old and unhealed. Because I couldn't help the last widow who got caught in Crow's trap. She lost her ranch, lost everything. Last I heard, she and her kids were living in a boarding house in Helena, working whatever jobs they could find. Her youngest was about Nell's age. He looked at Nell, who was watching him with wide eyes. I won't watch that happen again, if I can help it. The cabin fell silent except for the tick of the clock on the mantel, Thomas's grandfather's clock, one of the few valuable things they owned. Martha studied Cole's face, searching for deception or hidden motive. She found only a kind of weary determination. The papers are in the bureau, she said finally. I'll get them. She returned with a folder of documents she barely understood, loan agreements, payment schedules, transfer notices, all dense with legal language that might as well have been written in a foreign tongue. Cole took them carefully, spread them on the table, and began reading with focused attention. Owen hovered nearby, trying to read over Cole's shoulder. Nell had lost interest and was singing to her doll again, something about butterflies and sunshine. Martha busied herself with the morning routine, stoking the stove, checking the water bucket, inventorying their meager supplies, while Cole worked his way through the papers. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim. It's worse than I thought. Martha's hand stilled on the flour sack. How? The interest rate changed 3 times in the first year. Each time it's noted in the fine print, but it's buried under other language. And the payment schedule. Crow's got you credited for less than half what your husband actually paid. See here? He pointed to a column of numbers. This shows 12 payments of $20 each, but the credited amount only shows $90 total. That doesn't make sense. It does if you're trying to trap someone in permanent debt. Every payment gets partially credited as administrative fees or late charges even when they were on time. It's legal robbery, Mrs. Caldwell, the kind that happens with a pen instead of a gun. Martha sank into her chair, the strength going out of her legs. So there's nothing I can do. I didn't say that. Cole gathered the papers back into a neat stack. I said it's worse than I thought, but there's always something you can do. First thing is, we need to get these papers to someone who can actually read law. There's a circuit judge who comes through Helena, Judge Morrison. He's got a reputation for fairness, and he doesn't like men who prey on widows. Helena's 2 days' ride. I can't leave the children that long, and I can't take them with me in this heat. I'll go. You? Martha stared at him. You've been here one day. Why would you? Because it needs doing, and I can do it. Cole's voice was level, factual. I know the judge, worked on his brother's ranch 5 years back. He'll see me, and he'll look at these papers if I ask him to. I can't pay you for that kind of time away. Didn't ask you to. I said I'd work for food and shelter. This is part of the work. Owen stepped closer to the table. But the fence? And the barn roof. If you go to Helena, that won't get fixed. No, Cole agreed. But if your mama loses the ranch, it won't matter if the fence is fixed or not. First things first, we stop Crow from stealing your home. Then we worry about repairs. Martha looked down at her hands, work-worn and calloused, trembling slightly despite her best efforts to steady them. A stranger was offering to ride 2 days to help her fight a man he barely knew, to save a ranch that wasn't his, to protect children who weren't his responsibility. It made no sense. People didn't do things like this without wanting something in return. What do you want? She asked quietly. Really? Cole was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped even lower, barely above a whisper. I want to sleep at night without seeing a woman's face, without hearing her kids crying, without knowing I rode away when I could have stayed and fought. He met Martha's eyes directly. I want to do better this time. That's all. The clock ticked. Nell sang. Owen held his breath. Martha made her decision. You can take the papers, but I'm coming with you. Mrs. Caldwell, it's my ranch, my debt, my fight. You said so yourself. She stood, resolve hardening in her chest. Owen's old enough to manage things for a day. We'll leave before dawn tomorrow, ride hard, be back by nightfall the day after. It's risky, but everything's risky now. Mama, I don't want you to go. Nell's voice was small, frightened. Martha knelt beside her daughter's chair, smoothed the child's tangled hair. I know, baby girl. But sometimes we have to do scary things to protect what matters. You and Owen will be just fine. You'll stay together, keep the doors locked, and your brother will take care of you. Right, Owen? Owen straightened, trying to look older than his 8 years. Right. I can handle it. I know you can. Martha kissed Nell's forehead, then stood and faced Cole. We leave at first light. That gives you the rest of today to show Owen what needs doing while we're gone. Cole nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. They spent the remainder of the morning in careful preparation. Cole showed Owen how to check the water level in the well, how to ration feed for the chickens, how to watch the cattle for signs of distress in the heat. He spoke to the boy like an equal, never condescending, always patient when Owen asked questions. Martha packed what little food they could spare for the journey. Hard biscuits, dried beef that was more leather than meat, a precious half-wheel of cheese she'd been saving. She filled canteens with well water, checked the saddle on her mare, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. Cole worked through it anyway, reinforcing the corral fence with a determination that spoke of promises made to himself. Martha watched him from the cabin window while she mended Owen's spare shirt, watched the way he moved, economical, purposeful, never wasting energy on unnecessary flourishes. Mama? Nell appeared at her elbow, doll in hand. Is Mr. Ryder going to be my new papa? Martha's needle slipped, pricked her finger. She sucked the blood away and chose her words carefully. No, baby, Mr. Ryder is just helping us for a little while. But he's nice, and he's strong, and Papa's gone. I know Papa's gone. Martha set the mending aside, pulled Nell into her lap. But people don't just become new papas because they're nice and strong. That's not how it works. How does it work? How did it work? Martha had no answer that a 5-year-old would understand, no way to explain that she'd already had her great love, that Thomas had been her beginning and middle and what she'd assumed would be her end. No way to express that the hollow space where her heart used to be felt too damaged to ever hold anything again. Sometimes, she said slowly, people come into our lives just when we need them. They help us, and then they move on. That doesn't make them family. That makes them... She paused, searching. Guardian angels, maybe. Angels have wings. Not always. Sometimes they just have strong backs and calloused hands and arrive at exactly the right moment. Nell considered this, her small face serious. I think Mr. Ryder is sad. Why do you think that? His eyes. They look like Owen's eyes after Papa died, like there's crying inside but it can't get out. Children saw too much sometimes. Martha hugged her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, dust and heat, and something indefinably sweet. Maybe he is sad. Lots of people are. Are you sad, Mama? Every day, baby girl, every single day. Me too. They sat together in the hot cabin, holding each other, while outside Cole hammered another nail into fence wood that might not even be theirs in 13 days. That evening, Martha prepared their best meal in weeks, fried salt pork, beans, fresh biscuits made with the last of the good flour. It felt like a sending-off feast, a warrior's meal before battle. They ate at the table together, all 4 of them, and for a brief moment it almost felt normal, almost felt like a family. After supper, Cole excused himself to the barn. Owen followed him out, ostensibly to help settle the horses, but really, Martha suspected, to ask the questions boys asked men when women weren't around. She let him go. Let him have that masculine space, that seeking of guidance from someone who wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. She and Nell washed the dishes in comfortable silence. Then Martha read from the worn Bible that had been her grandmother's. Not because she felt particularly faithful these days, but because the ritual soothed Nell, gave structure to the formless fear that surrounded them. When the children were finally asleep, Martha stepped outside into the cooling darkness. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by any competing light. She could see the barn, lamplight showing through cracks in the walls where Cole presumably prepared for the journey. She should sleep, should rest for the hard ride tomorrow. Instead, she walked to the barn, drawn by impulse she didn't examine too closely. Cole was checking his saddle, running his hands over leather, testing straps and buckles. He looked up when her shadow fell across the lamplight. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Didn't try yet. Martha leaned against a support post, arms crossed. I wanted to say thank you for this, for caring when you don't have to. Everyone has to care sometime, otherwise what's the point? Most people don't see it that way. Most people are wrong. Cole returned his attention to the saddle. Your boy asked me something earlier, thought you should know. What? Asked if I was going to stay. After we deal with Crow, after the ranch is safe, asked if I'd stay and help run it. Martha's breath caught. What did you tell him? Told him I'm a drifter, not the staying kind. Told him he's going to be the man of this ranch, so he'd better learn everything he can while I'm here. Cole's hand stilled on the leather. But truth is, I don't know what I told him. Don't know if I'm the staying kind or not. Never tried. Why not? Because every place I've stayed, I've lost. Every person I've cared about, I've buried. After a while, it's easier to keep moving. Can't lose what you don't have. Martha understood that. Understood it in her bones. Except you can't live that way forever. No. Cole looked at her then, really looked at her, and Martha felt something shift in the air between them. No, you can't. Eventually, you have to stop running. Have to plant feet somewhere and say, this is it. This is where I make my stand. Is this that place for you? I don't know yet. Ask me again when we get back from Helena. Martha nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how the lamplight made shadows dance across his face, how the night sounds seemed very loud and very distant all at once. I should go, she said. Early start tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. But neither of them moved, not for a handful of heartbeats that stretched like hours. Then Martha turned and walked back to the cabin, her pulse hammering in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the realization that the hollow space in her chest had just flickered with something that felt dangerously like hope. She didn't look back. In the barn, Cole stood in the lamplight and watched her go, and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into this time. The night deepened. The heat finally broke just enough to breathe, and tomorrow the real fight would begin. They rode out before the sun touched the horizon, when the world existed in that gray space between night and morning. Martha had kissed her sleeping children, left detailed instructions with Owen that the boy had repeated back to her 3 times, and checked the rifle's placement by the door twice before finally forcing herself to leave. The hardest part had been Nell's small voice, half asleep, asking when Mama would be home. Soon, baby girl, soon. The trail to Helena cut through territory that had once seemed beautiful to Martha, rolling grassland dotted with sage, distant mountains purple against the sky, creeks that sang over smooth stones. Now it all looked different through the lens of desperation. The grass was sparse and brittle. The creeks ran shallow. Even the mountains seemed to judge her, standing eternal and indifferent to the struggles of one widow trying to save a failing ranch. Cole rode slightly ahead, his pale horse setting an efficient pace that 8 miles without exhausting the animals. He'd been quiet since they left, speaking only to point out a good place to water the horses or to suggest they walk for a stretch to spare the mounts. Martha appreciated the silence. Her mind was too full of worry and what-ifs to manage conversation. They'd been riding perhaps 2 hours when Cole finally spoke. You ever been to Helena before? Once. When Thomas and I first came to Montana, we spent 3 days there getting supplies before heading out to claim the land. The memory felt like something from another lifetime. It seemed like the biggest town I'd ever seen. All those buildings, all those people. It's grown since then. Silver Strikes brought in thousands. Most of them are gone now that the easy money's played out, but enough stayed to make it a real city. Cole shifted in his saddle, easing his back. Judge Morrison keeps an office on Main Street. We'll find him there, assuming he's not out on circuit. And if he is out on circuit, then we wait, or we track him down. Whatever it takes. The sun climbed higher, and with it came the heat. By mid-morning, both horses were dark with sweat, and Martha's canteen was half empty. They stopped at a creek to rest and water the animals, and Martha found a spot in the shade of a cottonwood while Cole tended to the horses with the same careful attention he gave everything. You're good with animals, she observed. Learned early. My father bred horses back in Missouri. Before... He stopped, jaw tightening. Before things went bad. Martha waited, recognizing the shape of old pain when she saw it. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his hand running along his horse's neck in steady strokes. I was 16 when they came. Men like Crow, though they had a different name, said my father owed money he didn't have, showed papers that didn't match what he'd borrowed. By the time we figured out the game, it was too late. They took the farm, the horses, everything. My mother died that winter, just gave up, I think, and my father followed her 6 months later. Drank himself to death in a boarding house that smelled like piss and failure. Colt, I'm so sorry. Don't be. It was 20 years ago. I've made my peace with it. But his hands were tight on the reins, and Martha knew he was lying. You didn't make peace with that kind of loss. You just learned to carry it. They mounted again and continued riding. The trail wound through increasingly rough country, past abandoned homesteads where hope had died before the dreams could take root. Martha saw them, the collapsed roofs, the empty corrals, the wells that had run dry. Each one was a story of failure, a family's broken promise to themselves. How many, do you think? She asked quietly. How many families has Crow destroyed? In this territory? Dozens at least. Across all the places he's operated? Could be hundreds. Cole's voice was flat, factual. Men like him, they don't just take land. They take futures. Take the belief that hard work means something, that the law protects the decent. They poison everything they touch. Then why does no one stop him? Because he's careful, stays just inside the law, or close enough that proving otherwise takes more money than most folks have. And because he targets people who can't fight back, widows, immigrants who don't speak English well, farmers who trust a handshake more than paperwork. By the time they understand what's happened, they're already broken. Martha's mare stumbled slightly, caught herself. Martha tightened her grip, her mind churning. You said you couldn't help the last widow, the one with children Nell's age. Mary Henderson. Her husband died in a mining accident. Crow bought her debt 3 weeks later, had her off the land in 2 months. Cole's voice went quieter. I was working on a ranch nearby. Heard about it, rode over to see if I could help. But I was too late. She'd already signed everything away, didn't understand what she was signing. Her youngest daughter, little thing named Sarah, she gave me a drawing she'd made. Horses running across a field. Said it was for helping, even though I hadn't helped at all. You still have it? Carried it for 3 years. Lost it crossing a river in a storm. He paused. Felt like losing her all over again. They rode on. The sun climbed toward its zenith, brutal and unforgiving. Martha's thoughts kept circling back to her children, alone at the ranch, trusting her to come back with salvation. Owen trying to be strong. Nell singing to her doll to keep the fear away. What if this didn't work? What if Judge Morrison couldn't help, or wouldn't help, or had been bought by Crow like so many others? Stop, Cole said suddenly. Martha pulled up. What? You're thinking yourself into circles. I can see it from here. Whatever you're worrying about, it won't help anything. I can't just stop worrying. No, but you can decide whether the worry serves you or just wears you down. Cole gestured at the trail ahead. We've got another 6 hours of riding. You can spend it eating yourself alive with what-ifs, or you can save your strength for the fight ahead. Your choice. Martha wanted to argue, wanted to defend her right to worry about her children, her ranch, her entire crumbling world. But Cole was right. The worry changed nothing. It just made the miles feel longer. Tell me about Judge Morrison, she said instead. Cole's shoulders relaxed slightly. Jeremiah Morrison, originally from Kentucky, came west after the war. Saw too much corruption back east, wanted to start fresh where the law still meant something. He's tough but fair, doesn't care about money or influence, just cares about right and wrong. Sounds too good to be true. He's got his flaws, drinks too much sometimes, has a temper when someone wastes his time. But when it comes to men like Crow, he's relentless. Saw him tear apart a land scheme in Silver Bow County 3 years back. 5 men went to prison, 24 families got their property back. So there's hope. There's always hope. Question is whether you can hold on to it long enough for it to matter. They stopped twice more to rest the horses, eating their meager supplies in the shade of rock outcroppings that provided brief respite from the sun. Each time they mounted again, Martha's body protested a little more. She hadn't ridden this long or this hard in years, and every muscle screamed its complaint. But she didn't complain. Didn't ask to slow down or stop early. Thomas had taught her that some things required pushing through pain, and this was one of them. The afternoon shadows were lengthening when Helena finally appeared in the distance. A sprawl of buildings clustered in a valley, smoke from 100 chimneys smudging the sky. It looked bigger than Martha remembered, more permanent, as if in the years since she'd been here, the town had decided to stop being temporary and become real. They rode down the main street as evening approached, past saloons already full of miners and gamblers, past the assay office and the bank, and the general store with its windows full of goods Martha couldn't afford. People stared at them, a dusty woman and a trail-worn man on tired horses. But no one spoke. In a town like Helena, strangers were too common to merit conversation. Cole led them to a modest hotel on a side street, helped Martha dismount, and handed coins to a boy to stable their horses. Inside, the proprietor, a thin woman with suspicious eyes, took Cole's money for 2 rooms without comment, handed over keys, and returned to her ledger book. Martha's room was small and spare. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window overlooking the alley. She sank onto the bed, every bone aching, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of complete exhaustion. Then she forced herself up, washed her face and hands with tepid water from the pitcher, and tried to make herself presentable. A knock at her door, Cole's voice. "Morrison's office is still open, if you're ready." She was ready. She would never be ready. Both were true at once. Judge Morrison's office occupied the 2nd floor of a building that also housed a lawyer and a dentist. The stairs creaked under their boots, and the hallway smelled of paper and lamp oil and something medicinal from the dentist's rooms. A painted sign read, "Honorable Jeremiah Morrison, District Judge. Office hours by appointment." Cole knocked anyway. "It's open," came a voice from inside, rough with tobacco and time. The office was cramped and chaotic, stacks of papers on every surface, law books jammed into shelves built for half as many, a desk buried under documents and correspondence. Behind it sat a man in his 60s, gray-bearded and heavy through the middle, his vest unbuttoned and his collar loose. He looked up from the brief he was reading, and his eyes sharpened with recognition. "Cole Ryder, I'll be damned." "Judge Morrison." Cole removed his hat. "Thank you for seeing us." "Didn't say I'd see you, said the door was open." But Morrison was already rising, extending a hand that Cole shook firmly. "What brings you to Helena? Last I heard you were working ranches down in Wyoming." "Was. This is Mrs. Martha Caldwell. She needs your help with a matter of considerable urgency." Morrison's gaze shifted to Martha, assessing her with the shrewd attention of a man who'd spent decades judging character. "Mrs. Caldwell, please sit, both of you." He cleared papers from 2 chairs, revealing seats that had seen better decades. "Now then, what's the nature of this urgent matter?" Martha opened her mouth, found her throat tight with emotion, and had to swallow twice before words would come. "Silas Crow is trying to steal my ranch." Morrison's expression darkened immediately. "Crow. Should have guessed. Go on." She told him everything. Thomas's death, the mortgage that had somehow transferred to Crow's ownership, the debt that had doubled through invisible interest and phantom fees, the 13 days she had left before losing everything. Cole added details, pointed out specific problems in the paperwork they'd brought, explained the pattern he'd seen in Crow's other schemes. Morrison listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin, his eyes never leaving Martha's face. When she finished, silence filled the office like water rising. Finally, the judge spoke. "I've been trying to nail Crow for 5 years. He's slippery as a greased pig and twice as smart. Every time I think I've got him, he produces some document that just barely keeps him legal." He reached for the papers Cole offered. "But this, if what you're telling me is true, this might be different." "How?" Martha asked. "Because you're here. Most of Crow's victims, by the time they realize they've been cheated, they're too broken or too scared to fight. They sign away their rights and disappear." Morrison began reading the documents, his frown deepening with each page. "But you came to Helena, you brought these papers, and you brought Cole Ryder, who I know wouldn't waste my time with a weak case." "Is it a weak case?" Morrison was quiet for several minutes, reading with the careful attention of a man who knew how to spot lies hidden in legal language. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at Martha with something that might have been respect. It's not weak. It's actually quite strong. Crow got greedy this time. See these interest rate changes? They violate Montana territorial lending statutes passed 2 years ago. And these administrative fees, they exceed the legal maximum by almost double. He's been getting away with this because no one knew to look for these specific violations. Morrison leaned back in his chair, which protested with a groan. The question is, what do you want me to do about it? Stop him, Martha said simply. Stop him from taking my home. I can do better than that. I can take him down entirely, if you're willing to help. Martha exchanged a glance with Cole, who gave her a slight nod. What do you need? I need you to go to Crow's office tomorrow. Tell him you want to negotiate, that you might be able to pay something toward the debt. Get him talking. Get him to show you his ledger, explain his calculations. And while you're doing that, Morrison smiled, and it was not a kind expression. I'll have men watching and listening. Crow's arrogant. He likes to gloat. If we can get him to admit even part of his scheme in front of witnesses, I can arrest him on the spot. You want to use her as bait, Cole said, his voice tight. I want to give Mrs. Caldwell her ranch back and put a criminal in prison. Yes, there's risk, but there's risk in doing nothing too. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. The thought of facing Crow alone, of deliberately walking into his office and pretending to negotiate while trying to trap him, it terrified her. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was going home empty-handed, watching the days count down, explaining to her children that she'd been too afraid to fight. I'll do it, she said. Martha, Cole started. I'll do it, she repeated, stronger this time. When and where? Morrison pulled out a pocket watch, checked the time. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. His office above the Mercantile on Wallace Street. I'll have Deputy Marshal's position nearby, close enough to intervene if things go wrong. You go in, you talk to him, you get him talking about the debt. If he admits to anything illegal, we move in. If he doesn't, well, we'll have tried. And what happens to my ranch in the meantime? I've got less than 2 weeks left. I'll file an emergency injunction tonight. It'll freeze any action on the property until this matter is resolved. Crow won't be able to touch your land while there's an active investigation. Morrison started gathering papers, his movements suddenly energized. This is good, Mrs. Caldwell. This is the break I've been waiting for. They left the office as full darkness settled over Helena. The streets had come alive with evening activity, music spilling from saloons, laughter, and cursing in equal measure, the rattle of wagons and the clop of hooves on packed dirt. Martha walked beside Cole in silence, her mind spinning with what she'd just agreed to. You don't have to do this, Cole said when they reached the hotel. Morrison's plan is solid, but it puts you in danger. Everything puts me in danger right now. At least this way I'm fighting back instead of just enduring. They stopped at the base of the stairs leading to the rooms. The hotel's common room buzzed with conversation, but here in the stairwell, it was almost quiet. Your husband, Cole said carefully. He would have been proud of you, the way you're fighting for what's his, what's yours. Thomas never would have gotten us into this position in the first place. He was too careful, too smart. The words came out bitter, and Martha immediately regretted them. I'm sorry. That's not fair to his memory. Grief isn't fair, neither is survival. Cole leaned against the wall, his face half in shadow. You're doing the best you can with what you were given. That's all anyone can do. Martha looked up at him. This stranger who'd ridden into her life less than 3 days ago and was now standing with her in a Helena hotel, preparing to help her face down the man who wanted to destroy her. Why are you really doing this, Cole? The truth this time. I told you the truth. I want to do better than I did before. That's part of it, but not all. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. My father used to say that a man's life is measured by the moments he chooses to stand rather than walk away. He said most of those moments are small, helping a neighbor fix a fence, speaking up when someone's being cheated, staying when leaving would be easier. But they add up. They become who you are. Cole's jaw tightened. I've walked away from too many moments. Maybe this is me trying to become someone worth being. Something in Martha's chest loosened just slightly. You already are, you know, worth being. I'm not sure I believe that, but I appreciate you saying it. They stood there in the stairwell, the noise of the hotel washing around them like a river around stones, and Martha realized with sudden clarity that she trusted this man. Trusted him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone since Thomas died. Maybe not even Thomas, toward the end, when he'd hidden the depth of their financial trouble to spare her worry. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of it. The fence, the papers, bringing me here. I couldn't have done any of this alone." "You would have found a way. You're stronger than you think." "I don't feel strong." "The strongest people never do." Cole straightened, settling his hat back on his head. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be harder than the ride here." Martha nodded and climbed the stairs to her room. Inside, she undressed to her shift, lay down on the narrow bed and tried to sleep. But her mind kept circling back to tomorrow, to Crow's office, to all the ways this could go wrong. Somewhere in the building, a woman laughed. Somewhere closer, someone coughed. The sounds of human life, chaotic and messy and somehow comforting. Martha closed her eyes and thought of her children, alone at the ranch. Owen keeping watch with his father's rifle. Nell singing to her doll to keep the darkness at bay. She would do this, would walk into Crow's office and face him with whatever courage she could summon. Would get him talking, get him to reveal himself. Would fight for her home and her children's future with everything she had. And if it went wrong, if Crow saw through the trap, if the deputies weren't fast enough, well, at least she would have fought. At least she wouldn't have gone gentle into the theft of everything she loved. Sleep came eventually, thin and troubled, full of dreams about burning ranches and children crying, and a man with cold eyes counting money while families starved. Martha woke before dawn, her body aching from the previous day's ride and the unfamiliar bed. She dressed in her best dress, the dark blue one she'd worn to Thomas's funeral, now faded and tight in places where grief had changed her shape. She pinned up her hair with shaking hands, trying 3 times before getting it right. Cole was waiting in the hotel's dining room, 2 cups of coffee and some bread on the table. He stood when she entered, his face grave. "Sleep at all?" he asked. "Some. You?" "Enough." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Eat something. You'll need your strength." The bread was hard and the coffee was bitter, but Martha forced both down. Her stomach churned with nerves, but she knew Cole was right. Whatever happened in the next few hours, she needed to be sharp, focused. They walked to Crow's office through streets still waking up, past shopkeepers opening shutters and sweeping stoops. The Mercantile stood on Wallace Street, a 3-story brick building that dominated the block. Martha had been here before, that terrible day when she'd first learned the true size of her debt. The memory made her steps falter. Cole touched her elbow lightly. "You can still back out. No shame in it." "Yes, there is. If I back out now, I'll never forgive myself." Martha straightened her spine, lifted her chin. "I'm ready. Remember what Morrison said. Get him talking. Don't push too hard, just let him enjoy explaining how clever he is. Men like Crow, they can't resist showing off." Martha nodded. Around them she could see men who might be deputy marshals, a fellow reading a newspaper near the barber shop, another examining a wagon wheel across the street, a third sweeping the walk in front of the assay office. Morrison had positioned them well, close enough to help, far enough to stay hidden. The stairs to Crow's office felt steeper than she remembered. Each step required conscious effort, conscious courage. At the top, a door with frosted glass and gold lettering, Silas Crow, Private Lending and Land Acquisitions. Martha knocked. "Enter," came Crow's voice, smooth and prosperous. She opened the door and stepped into the office that smelled of cigars and leather and ambition. Silas Crow sat behind his mahogany desk, gold watch chain gleaming across his substantial middle, a smile on his fleshy face that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Caldwell, what an unexpected pleasure." He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. To what do I owe this visit?" Martha sat, folded her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "I've come to discuss my debt, to see if we might reach some arrangement." Crow's smile widened. "I'm always willing to discuss reasonable arrangements with my clients. Always." And somewhere outside, hidden among the morning crowds, Cole Ryder watched the office window and prayed that Martha Caldwell was as strong as he believed her to be. The trap was set. Now they would see if it held. Crow gestured expansively at the ledger open on his desk, the pages filled with numbers that had destroyed Martha's peace for months. You see, Mrs. Caldwell, the beauty of proper accounting is that everything becomes crystal clear. No ambiguity, no confusion, just simple mathematics. Martha forced herself to lean forward, to study the ledger as if she understood half of what she was seeing. I'm trying to understand how the amount grew so much. My husband said he borrowed $800. Your late husband, bless him, borrowed $800 initially, yes, but he failed to grasp the compounding nature of interest, particularly when payments are missed or incomplete. Crow's thick finger traced down a column of figures. See here? July of last year, payment was 10 days late. That triggered a penalty rate increase from 8% to 12%. Then in September, another late payment. Rate went to 15%. But Thomas was never late with payments. He kept meticulous records. Did he? Crow's smile never wavered. Because my records show something quite different, and my records, Mrs. Caldwell, are legally binding. They've been notarized, filed with the territorial office, backed by witnesses. Martha's hands clenched in her lap. Witnesses who work for you. Witnesses who are upstanding members of this community. Crow leaned back in his chair, his voice taking on a paternal tone that made Martha's skin crawl. I understand this is difficult to accept. Grief clouds judgment, but the numbers don't lie, my dear. Your husband was in over his head long before his unfortunate accident. If anything, I showed remarkable patience in waiting 3 months after his death to pursue collection. How generous of you. The sarcasm slipped out before Martha could stop it. Crow's eyes narrowed slightly, though his smile remained fixed. I am generous, actually. More generous than most in my position would be. Which is why I'm willing to entertain this conversation at all. He closed the ledger with deliberate care. Now, you mentioned seeking an arrangement. What did you have in mind? This was it, the moment Judge Morrison had coached her for. Get him talking, get him confident, get him to reveal the scheme in his own words. Martha took a careful breath. I have some cattle left. Not many, but they'd bring in something. And I could sell personal items, furniture, tools. If I could get an extension, maybe 6 months, I could raise enough to make a substantial payment. 6 months. Crow shook his head sadly. Mrs. Caldwell, in 6 months, the interest alone will add another $200 to your debt. You'd be running backwards, getting deeper rather than climbing out. Then what do you suggest? Well, there is one option. Crow pulled a different set of papers from his desk drawer. You could sign over the property to me now, settle the debt entirely, and I would allow you and your children to remain on the land as tenants. You'd pay a very reasonable monthly rent, say $40, and you'd be free of this crushing burden. No more sleepless nights worrying about payments and deadlines. Martha stared at the papers, her heart pounding. You want me to give you my ranch and then pay you rent to live in my own home? Technically, it would be my home at that point, but yes, essentially. Crow's voice was honey smooth, reasonable. Think of it as a fresh start. You'd have security, stability. Your children would have a roof over their heads, and you'd be free of debt. Free of everything my husband worked for, everything he died building. Sentiment won't feed your children, Mrs. Caldwell. Crow's tone hardened slightly. I'm offering you a lifeline here. Most people in your situation end up with nothing. At least this way, you keep your home, even if you don't own it. For how long? Until you decide the rent should be $60? $80? Until one missed payment and you throw us out anyway. Crow's smile finally faltered. I don't appreciate the implication that I would act dishonorably. And I don't appreciate being robbed in broad daylight with a smile and a handshake. Martha stood, anger overriding fear. My husband paid you faithfully for 5 years, every payment on time, every dollar accounted for. But somehow your ledger shows something different. How does that work, Mr. Crow? How do honest payments disappear? Sit down, Mrs. Caldwell. The paternal tone was gone, replaced by something cold and hard. You're upset, I understand, but you're also making serious accusations that could land you in legal trouble. I'm already in legal trouble. You made sure of that. Crow stood as well, his bulk making the office feel smaller. Let me explain something to you. I bought your husband's debt legally. I've administered it according to the terms spelled out in legally binding documents. If you don't like those terms, perhaps your husband should have read more carefully before signing, but that's not my problem. That's yours. You changed the terms after he was dead. I enforce provisions that were always present. The fact that your husband didn't understand them doesn't make them invalid. Crow moved around the desk, and Martha instinctively stepped back. Now, I've been patient with you. I've offered you a reasonable solution. But my patience has limits, Mrs. Caldwell. You have 12 days left. Either you pay the full amount, which we both know you can't, or you sign those papers and accept my generous offer to let you stay as a tenant. Those are your only options. There's always another option, such as, I could fight you. I could take this to a judge, show him your ledger, let him decide if all these convenient fees and rate changes are legal. Crow laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. Please do. I have the best lawyers in the territory on retainer. I have witnesses who will swear to every transaction. I have documents that will stand up to any scrutiny. What do you have? A dead husband's word and your own confusion about basic financial instruments? I have the truth. The truth. Crow's expression turned pitying. Mrs. Caldwell, truth is what can be proven in court. And in court, I will bury you. I will take your ranch, your cattle, your furniture, every stick of wood your children have ever called home. And when I'm done, you'll be lucky if I don't sue you for defamation on top of everything else. Martha's vision blurred with rage and tears she refused to shed. You're destroying families. How many others? How many people have you cheated? I don't cheat. I provide a service, capital for those who need it. If they can't meet their obligations, that's a failure of character, not of my methods. Crow returned to his desk, sat down heavily. Now, I've wasted enough time on this conversation. You have 12 days, Mrs. Caldwell. Use them wisely. And I'd suggest you consider my offer very seriously because it's the best you're going to get. I'd rather burn the ranch to the ground than let you have it. That would be destruction of collateral and would constitute criminal behavior. I wouldn't recommend it. Crow opened his ledger again, dismissing her. Good day, Mrs. Caldwell. See yourself out. Martha stood frozen, her entire body shaking with fury and helplessness. She'd gotten him talking, but had she gotten enough? Had the deputies heard? Would Morrison consider this sufficient evidence? The office door opened behind her. Martha spun, expecting to see deputy marshals, expecting salvation. Instead, 3 men entered, rough-looking characters in dusty trail clothes, gun belts worn low and easy. The kind of men who got paid for violence, not conversation. Mr. Crow, the first one said, touching his hat brim. Thought we heard raised voices. Nothing I can't handle, Dixon. Mrs. Caldwell was just leaving. Dixon stepped aside, but not far, just enough to make it clear that Martha's exit would be observed, controlled. She met his eyes and saw nothing, no sympathy, no interest, just the blank gaze of a man who did what he was paid to do without thought or conscience. Martha walked toward the door, each step requiring will. But as she passed Dixon, she turned back to face Crow one last time. You won't get away with this. Crow didn't look up from his ledger. I already have, dozens of times. You're not special, Mrs. Caldwell. You're just another debt I'll collect. Martha left, forcing herself not to run, not to show how desperately she wanted to be out of that room, away from Crow's casual cruelty and the hired guns who enforced it. The stairs seemed endless. Her legs shook with each step. Outside, the morning sun felt too bright after the dimness of Crow's office. Martha stood on the boardwalk, gulping air, trying to steady herself. Cole appeared at her elbow. You all right? Did Morrison's men hear? Was it enough? I don't know. I couldn't get close enough. Cole's jaw was tight. I saw those 3 go in, Crow's security. They weren't there when you entered. He called them. Martha's voice shook. Once I started pushing back, once I accused him of fraud, he called his dogs. A man approached from across the street. One of the deputies Martha had spotted earlier, still carrying his newspaper. He walked past them, his voice low. Judge Morrison wants to see you. His office. Now. They walked quickly through Helena's waking streets, neither speaking. Martha's mind spun with fragments of the conversation, trying to remember exactly what Crow had said, which admissions might qualify as evidence. He'd been so careful, so practiced at staying just on the right side of legal language while making his intentions clear. Morrison's office door stood open. The judge sat behind his desk, a deputy marshal standing beside him, a tall, lean man with a badge pinned to his vest and a face carved from granite. "Mrs. Caldwell, Cole, please close the door." Morrison's expression was grim. "This is Deputy Marshal Warren." He was positioned in the office below Crow's, listening through the floorboards. "Did you hear enough?" Martha asked, her voice tight with desperate hope. Warren shook his head. "We heard the conversation, but nothing Crow said was explicitly illegal. He offered you a tenancy arrangement, which is perfectly legal. He claimed his records were accurate and legally filed, which may or may not be true, but isn't provable from conversation alone. He threatened legal action if you defamed him, which is his right. He as good as admitted to fraud. He admitted to being a hard businessman. That's not a crime." Warren's voice was sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Caldwell. I know what he's doing. Judge Morrison knows. But knowing and proving in court are different things." Martha sank into a chair, the last of her hope draining away. "So that's it. We tried, and it wasn't enough." Morrison leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "It's not over. We didn't get what we needed from the conversation, but we're not done fighting. Warren, tell her." The deputy marshal's expression shifted slightly. "While you were in Crow's office, we executed a search warrant on his private files. Based on your complaint and the irregularities you pointed out in your documents, Judge Morrison issued the warrant this morning." Martha's head snapped up. And we found a ledger. A different ledger from the ones he shows clients. This one has the real numbers. What people actually borrowed, what they actually paid, how much Crow has been skimming off each transaction." Warren pulled a slim leather-bound book from his coat. "It's all here. Not just your case, but 47 others across 3 territories. Names, dates, amounts. Proof of systematic fraud going back 8 years. Martha couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was hearing. Morrison's smile was wolfish. Crow kept records of his crimes. Detailed records. Probably thought he was being clever, keeping track of his profits. Instead, he documented his own destruction. "So you can arrest him?" Cole asked. "We can do better than that. We can shut down his entire operation, return property to the families he stole from, and make sure he spends the next decade in territorial prison." Morrison stood, walked to the window overlooking Main Street. "But there's a complication." Of course there was. Martha braced herself. "Crow's not in his office anymore," Warren said. "When we entered with the warrant, he saw us coming, slipped out the back with those 3 men you saw. By the time we secured the ledger and went after him, he'd disappeared. He's running, probably, or preparing to destroy evidence we haven't found yet. Either way, he knows we're coming for him now." Cole's hand moved to his gun belt, a gesture so unconscious Martha knew it was pure instinct. Where would he go? If he's smart, out of the territory entirely, Montana to Wyoming, Wyoming to Dakota, he could disappear into a dozen places where we have no jurisdiction. Warren looked at Morrison. "We've got men watching the stage depot, the rail station, the main roads. But if he goes cross-country, we might lose him." "He won't leave," Martha said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "He won't run. Not yet." "What makes you say that?" Morrison asked. "Because he still has 12 days on my debt, and 46 other debts probably coming due around the same time. If he runs now, he loses all that property, all that money. Men like Crow, they don't walk away from profit." Martha stood, certainty hardening in her chest. "He'll try to force through the seizures before you can stop him. He'll come for the ranches while he still legally can." Warren and Morrison exchanged glances. "She might be right," the deputy marshal said. "If Crow can get the properties signed over in the next few days, the transfers would be legal even if he's arrested afterward. He'd still own them, even from prison, could sell them through proxies. He'll come for my ranch." Martha's voice was steady now, clear. "It's close, it's vulnerable, and he already has men in place. He'll send them tonight, maybe tomorrow. Force me to sign, force me off the land." "Then we'll be waiting for him." Morrison's eyes gleamed. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm going to deputize you and Cole. You'll ride back to your ranch with a full complement of deputy marshals. When Crow's men show up, and they will show up, we'll arrest them for intimidation, trespassing, attempted extortion, and that will give us leverage to find Crow himself." Martha thought of her children, alone at the ranch for 2 days now, thought of Crow's hired guns riding toward them with violence in mind. How soon can we leave? Within the hour. I'll have 6 men ready to ride with you. Good men. Experienced. Morrison pulled out a pocket watch. You should be back at your ranch by tomorrow morning if you push hard. We'll push hard. Cole's voice was flat, final. And when Crow's men come, we'll be ready. They left Morrison's office in a flurry of preparation, gathering supplies, checking weapons, organizing the deputy marshals who would ride with them. Martha barely had time to think, which was probably for the best. If she let herself dwell on what they were riding into, fear might paralyze her. The ride back was brutal. They pushed the horses harder than was wise, stopping only briefly to water the animals and grab moments of rest. The 6 deputy marshals rode in tight formation, 3 ahead, 3 behind, protecting Martha and Cole in the middle. They were professional men, quiet and efficient, checking their weapons with the ease of long practice. Night fell, and they rode on. The moon was 3/4 full, providing enough light to navigate by. Martha swayed in her saddle, exhaustion pulling at her like hands dragging her down. Cole rode beside her, silent and watchful, his hand never far from his rifle. Somewhere past midnight, they stopped at a creek to rest the horses. Martha dismounted on legs that barely held her, stumbled to the water's edge, and splashed her face. The cold shocked her back to alertness. Cole appeared beside her, offering a canteen of coffee one of the deputies had brought. Drink, you'll need it. Martha drank, the bitter liquid burning down her throat. How much farther? 4 hours, maybe 5. We'll be there before dawn. And then? Then we wait. Make the ranch look normal, like nothing's changed. When Crow's men come, we let them show their hand, make their threats, commit their crimes, and then we take them. And if they hurt my children before we can stop them? Cole's expression went hard. That won't happen. I won't let it. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll die trying to keep them safe. That good enough? Martha looked at him, this drifter who'd stumbled into her life at the exact moment she needed him most, who'd stood with her through every impossible step of this fight. Why are you doing this, really? I know what you said about redemption and doing better, but Cole, you could die tomorrow. For a ranch that's not yours and children you barely know. Why? Cole was quiet for a long time, staring out at the dark prairie. I told you about my father, about how we lost everything. What I didn't tell you was that I was there when he died. I was 22, working in a Silver City saloon, and someone came to tell me my father was drinking himself to death in a room upstairs. I went up there, found him on a bed that stank of whiskey and shame. And you know what he said to me? His last words? Martha waited. He said, I should have fought, should have stood up to them, but I was afraid, and fear made me weak, and weakness made me nothing. Cole's voice cracked slightly. Then he closed his eyes and died, just stopped breathing, like living required more effort than he had left. Cole, I've spent 20 years trying to figure out what those words meant, trying to understand if he was right, if fear and weakness really did make him nothing, and I think... He paused, swallowed hard. I think he was wrong. Fear doesn't make you nothing. Giving up does. Letting the fear win without even fighting, that's what makes you nothing. Martha reached out, took his hand. His fingers were calloused and rough, warm despite the night chill. You're not nothing, Cole Ryder. Neither are you, Martha Caldwell. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. Come on. We've got miles to cover before sunrise. They rode on through the darkness, through country that looked different under the moon, strange and wild and unforgiving. Martha thought about Thomas, about the dreams they'd had for this land. She thought about her children, probably asleep in the cabin, trusting that Mama would come home and make everything right. She thought about Crow and his ledgers and his hired guns, about the coming confrontation that would decide everything. And she thought about Cole's father, dying in a whiskey-soaked room with regret on his lips. Fear doesn't make you nothing. Giving up does. Martha straightened in her saddle, ignoring the screaming protests of her body. She wasn't nothing. She was a widow fighting for her children's future. She was a woman who'd ridden to Helena and faced down her destroyer. She was Martha Caldwell, and her ranch was worth fighting for. Dawn was beginning to gray the eastern sky when they finally crested the ridge above Martha's property. The ranch spread below them, The cabin, the barn, the corrals, all peaceful in the pre-dawn quiet. Smoke rose from the chimney. Owen was already up, starting the morning fire. But something was wrong. Martha felt it before she saw it. Then she saw the horses, 5 of them, tied to the corral fence. Strange horses, their saddles marked with the brand she'd seen on Crow's men in Helena. "They're already here," she breathed. Cole pulled his rifle from its scabbard. "Deputy Warren, get your men in position. Whatever's happening, we end it now." The deputy marshals fanned out, approaching the ranch from different angles. Martha kicked her horse forward, terror overriding caution. Her children were down there, with Crow's men. While she'd been riding through the night, the predators had already arrived. As they drew closer, Martha could see figures moving inside the cabin through the window, could hear voices, raised in anger or fear, could smell smoke. Not cooking smoke, wood smoke. Too much of it. And then she saw it. The barn. Flames licking up one corner where the roof met the wall, spreading slowly but steadily through the sun-dried wood. They were burning her out. Martha spurred her horse into a full gallop, all caution abandoned. Behind her, Cole shouted something, but she couldn't hear past the roaring in her ears. The barn was burning. Her children were trapped inside the cabin. And Silas Crow's hired killers were making their play. The war for her ranch had begun. Martha's horse thundered into the yard, dirt spraying as she hauled back on the reins. The barn blazed behind her, flames now consuming the entire back wall, black smoke billowing into the dawn sky. Through the cabin window, she could see shadows moving, her children, Crow's men, chaos she couldn't parse from this distance. Cole reached her seconds later, grabbing her arm as she tried to dismount. "Wait for the deputies. Don't go in there alone." "My children are in there, and you'll be no good to them dead." Cole's grip was iron. "Look, the door." It opened. Dixon emerged first, the same hired gun from Crow's office, his hand wrapped around Owen's arm. The boy struggled, his face streaked with tears and soot, but Dixon held him easily. Behind them came 2 more men Martha didn't recognize, dragging Nell between them. The little girl was screaming, a sound that carved into Martha's soul like a blade. The 4th man appeared in the doorway, and Martha's breath stopped. Silas Crow himself, his expensive suit incongruous against the rough cabin frame, a sheaf of papers in one hand and a pistol in the other. "Mrs. Caldwell?" Crow's voice carried across the yard, calm and businesslike despite the burning barn and terrified children. "How convenient. I was just explaining to your son the importance of contractual obligations." Martha slid from her horse, Cole moving with her, his rifle already raised. Around the perimeter of the ranch, the deputy marshals were taking positions, behind the water trough, in the shadow of the corral, near the chicken coop. Professional, quiet, waiting for the right moment. "Let them go," Martha said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever this is, they're children. They're not part of it." "Oh, but they are. They're very much part of it," Crow gestured with the papers. "These are the deed transfer documents. All very legal, very proper. You're going to sign them, Mrs. Caldwell, and then you and your children are going to leave. Today. Right now, in fact." "The hell she is," Cole's voice was flat, dangerous. "Let the children go, Crow. This is between you and the law now." Crow's eyes finally registered Cole's presence, and something flickered in his expression, recognition, perhaps concern, quickly masked. "Ryder, I should have known. You always did have a habit of inserting yourself where you don't belong." "Funny. I was thinking the same about you. This is private property, my property as of..." Crow checked his pocket watch. "Approximately 3 minutes ago when I exercised the foreclosure clause. Mrs. Caldwell missed her payment deadline." "The deadline was 12 days away," Martha said. "Was. But the terms allow for immediate foreclosure in cases of property abandonment. You left your homestead unattended for 2 days. That qualifies." Crow smiled. "I did warn you to read the fine print." Deputy Marshal Warren stepped out from behind the water trough, his badge catching the firelight. "Silas Crow, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, arson, and intimidation of witnesses." Crow's men tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Dixon jerked Owen harder, making the boy cry out. The men holding Nell tightened their grip. "I don't think so, Marshal." Crow's pistol shifted. not quite pointing at the children, but making the threat clear. I think you're going to stand down, all of you. Because if you don't, well, accidents happen around children. Tragic, but unavoidable in situations like this. Martha's vision tunneled. She could see nothing but her children's faces, Owen trying to be brave despite his terror, Nell sobbing for her mother. The fire crackled and roared behind them all, consuming the barn Thomas had built with his own hands. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I would. I have. Ask the Henderson widow about her youngest daughter." Crow's expression was utterly calm. "Oh, wait, you can't. Sarah Henderson is buried in the Silver Bow Cemetery. Died in a house fire. Very sad. Very accidental." Cole's rifle barrel lowered an inch. "You son of a bitch. Careful, Ryder. Your righteous anger won't save these children if bullets start flying." Crow held out the papers toward Martha. "Sign. Now, or I give the word and my men make this very messy." Martha looked at the papers, at Crow's smug face, at her children held hostage by violence and greed. Every fiber of her being screamed to sign, to save them, to end this nightmare, even if it meant losing everything Thomas had built. What was a ranch compared to her babies? What was land compared to their lives? But then Owen spoke, his voice thin but clear. "Don't do it, Mama. Don't let him win." "Shut up, boy." Dixon cuffed Owen across the head, and Martha lunged forward before Cole could stop her. Crow's pistol came up, pointing directly at her chest. "Far enough." Martha froze, 5 feet from her son, so close she could see the red mark blooming on his cheek, close enough to see Nell's corn-husk doll on the ground where she'd dropped it, trampled and forgotten. "Owen's right, though." The voice came from the cabin doorway, an old woman stepping into view, weathered and thin as fence wire, a shotgun cradled in her arms with the casual competence of long familiarity. "You shouldn't let him win, Martha." Martha's heart lurched. "Mrs. Mercer?" Edith Mercer, the widow from the neighboring ranch 15 miles east, the woman who'd brought soup after Thomas's funeral and hadn't been seen since. She smiled, and it was fierce. "Thought you might need some help. Been watching Crow's boys since they rode in last night. Waited for the right moment. One more step and these children die." Crow's voice had lost its smoothness, gone sharp with real anger. "See? That's where you made your mistake, Crow." Edith's shotgun shifted slightly, not quite aimed but ready. "You thought these kids were alone, but this valley takes care of its own, and we're all pretty tired of you." Movement from the ridge, riders cresting the rise, 10, 15, 20 of them, ranchers and farmers, shopkeepers and drifters, women and men both, all armed, all grim-faced. Martha recognized faces from town, from church, from years of frontier living where neighbors might be distant, but bonds were strong. Among them rode Judge Morrison himself, his silver beard catching the morning light, another group of deputy marshals flanking him. Crow's men shifted nervously, suddenly aware they were surrounded. Dixon's grip on Owen loosened fractionally. "It's over, Crow." Morrison's voice carried authority that made even the fire seem to quiet. "We found your ledger, the real one. We have evidence of 47 cases of fraud, 8 counts of arson, 2 murders, and more crimes than I can list before breakfast. You're going to prison for the rest of your natural life. You can't prove murder. We can now." Sarah Henderson's mother finally agreed to testify. She was too afraid before, but when she heard you were threatening another widow and her children, well, fear has its limits. Morrison dismounted slowly, his hand on his pistol. "Your men can put down their weapons and live, or they can try to fight their way through 30 armed citizens and die. Their choice. You don't get a choice anymore." Dixon was the first to break. He released Owen and raised his hand, stepping back. "I didn't sign up for child murder. This is done." The other men holding Nell exchanged glances and let her go. She ran to Martha, who caught her and held her so tight the child gasped. Owen sprinted to them seconds later, and Martha sank to her knees, both children in her arms, her face pressed into their hair. Crow stood alone now, his pistol still raised but his leverage gone. His face had gone pale, sweat beading despite the morning chill. "This is a legal seizure, unlawful arrest. I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent." Warren stepped forward, 2 other deputies with him. "Which I'd strongly suggest you exercise." Crow's pistol wavered. For a moment, Martha thought he might actually fire, might go down fighting rather than face justice. But then his shoulders sagged, and the weapon lowered. "I want my lawyer." "You'll get one. And Helena, after you answer about 8 years of fraud and 2 dead children." Warren took the pistol, then the papers. "These deed transfers are void, by the way. Signed under duress based on fraudulent debt calculations, and attempted during an active criminal investigation. Mrs. Caldwell's ranch remains hers." Martha couldn't process the words. The children were safe, the threat was over. She held Owen and Nell and let herself shake with relief so profound it felt like drowning. Cole appeared at her side, kneeling in the dirt beside them. "You all right?" Owen pulled back slightly, his eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "Mr. Ryder, they tried to make Mama sign, tried to take our home." "I know, son, but they failed. You held strong." Cole's hand rested briefly on the boy's shoulder. "Your father would be proud." "The barn," Nell said suddenly, pointing with a trembling hand. "It's still burning." The fire had spread to half the structure now, flames reaching for the sky, heat pressing against them even at this distance. Martha watched Thomas's work, his sweat, his dreams, his legacy, consumed by Crow's cruelty. "We can rebuild it," Cole said quietly. "Barn's just wood and nails. You're all safe. That's what matters." The valley neighbors were already organizing, bucket lines forming from the well, men climbing to the cabin roof to wet it down with blankets, women herding livestock away from the flames. The efficiency spoke of hard-won frontier knowledge, of communities that survived by helping each other through disasters both natural and man-made. By full sunrise, the barn was lost. Only the frame remained, blackened timbers stark against the morning sky, smoke still rising in thin columns. But the cabin stood untouched, the corrals were intact, the cattle grazed peacefully in the far pasture, undisturbed by the human drama that had played out in their presence. Martha sat on the porch steps with her children pressed against her sides, watching the cleanup. Crow and his men had been hauled away in chains, loaded into a wagon bound for Helena and justice. Morrison had stayed to take statements, to document the scene, to ensure everything was recorded for the trial that would end Silas Crow's reign of terror. Edith Mercer settled beside Martha with a grunt, her shotgun resting across her knees. "Hell of a morning." "How did you know?" Martha asked. "How did you get everyone here?" "Word travels in the valley. Someone saw Crow's men riding this way yesterday, sent a boy to warn me. I rode to the other ranches, spread the alarm. We figured if Crow was moving on you, he'd be moving on all of us eventually. Better to make our stand together." Edith pulled out a pipe, began packing it with tobacco. "Plus Thomas was a good man, good neighbor. We take care of our own even after they're gone." "I can't repay this, any of it. Don't insult me with talk of payment. This is what community means." Edith lit her pipe, puffed thoughtfully. "Though I wouldn't say no to help come harvest time if you've got it to spare." "I'll be there." They sat in companionable silence, watching the smoke dissipate into clean blue sky. Owen had fallen asleep against Martha's shoulder, exhausted by terror and relief. Nell played quietly with her rescued doll, humming that made-up song about bluebirds. Cole approached from where he'd been helping clear debris, his face smudged with soot, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the early hour. "Morrison wants to talk to you before he heads back to Helena." The judge stood by his horse, reviewing papers one of the deputies had brought him. He looked up as Martha approached, his expression kind. "Mrs. Caldwell, hell of a way to start the day. Hell of a way to end a nightmare." "That it is." Morrison handed her a document. "This is the official cancellation of your debt. Every penny Crow claimed you owed is void. The territorial government will be conducting a full audit of his operation, but as far as your ranch goes, it's yours, free and clear." Martha stared at the paper, the words blurring. "I don't understand." "The original loan was $800. You've been making payments for 5 years. Even at legitimate interest rates, you've paid that debt twice over. The excess goes back to you, minus actual legal fees from the original lending institution. Should be about $200 coming your way once the territorial office processes everything." $200. It was more money than Martha had seen in months. Enough to rebuild the barn, enough to get through winter, enough to breathe. Furthermore, every property Crow seized through fraud will be returned to the original owners or their heirs. The families he destroyed, we're going to try to put them back together as best we can. Morrison's expression hardened, and Crow himself will spend the rest of his life in territorial prison. I'll make certain of it personally. What about his men, Dixon and the others? That depends on what they knew and when they knew it. If they were just hired guns following orders, they'll probably serve a few years. If they participated in the murders or arsons knowingly, well, Montana Territory takes a dim view of child killers. Morrison mounted his horse, settled himself in the saddle. You did good work, Mrs. Caldwell. Took courage to face him in that office, even more to stand up when he came for your children. The territory needs more people like you. I just did what had to be done. That's what courage is, doing what has to be done when everything in you is screaming to run. Morrison touched his hat brim. Take care of those children and that ranch. It's worth fighting for. He rode out, his deputies following, leaving Martha standing in her yard with ashes drifting down like snow and the impossible weight of relief making her dizzy. The valley neighbors worked through the morning, clearing the worst of the debris, salvaging what could be saved from the barn, bringing food and water and simple human presence. By noon, someone had organized a barn raising for the following week. Lumber was pledged, labor promised, a whole new structure planned to rise from the ashes of the old. Martha moved through it all in a daze, accepting help and gratitude and casseroles, her mind still trying to catch up with the fact that it was over. Really over. Crow was gone. The debt was canceled. Her ranch was safe. As afternoon shadows lengthened, the last of the neighbors finally departed, promising to return for the barn raising, leaving behind enough food to feed Martha's family for a week. Owen and Nell had been put to bed, sleeping the deep sleep of children who'd survived trauma and needed healing rest. Martha stood in the doorway of the blackened barn frame, staring at what remained. The hay was gone. Most of the tools had been destroyed. But the basic structure was salvageable, Morrison had said. The foundation was solid. They could build from here. Penny for your thoughts. Cole leaned against one of the intact support posts, his hat pushed back, exhaustion written in every line of his body. I'm thinking about what Thomas would say, Martha said quietly. About all of this. The fire, the fight, the debt being cleared. What do you think he'd say? I think he'd be furious that I let it get this bad. Furious that I didn't understand the papers he signed, didn't catch Crow's scheme earlier, didn't protect what he built better. Martha's voice cracked. And I think he'd be right to be furious. I think you're wrong. Cole pushed off the post, came to stand beside her. I think he'd say his wife was the bravest, strongest, most resourceful woman in Montana Territory. I think he'd say she took an impossible situation and found a way through it. I think he'd say she protected their children, saved their home, and stood up to a man who'd destroyed dozens of families. You didn't know him. No. But I know what any decent man would think watching what you did. And Thomas Caldwell, from everything I've heard, was a decent man. Martha looked up at Cole, at this stranger who'd ridden in on a pale horse and somehow become essential to her survival. You're staying for the barn raising. That's an order, not a question. Yes, ma'am. And after that? Cole was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains, purple in the fading light. I've been thinking about what I said, about being the drifting kind. Martha's heart squeezed. Of course he was leaving. Why would he stay? He'd done what he came to do, helped the widow who needed help, earned his redemption. Now he'd ride on to the next ranch, the next town, the next place where running felt easier than staying. I understand, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. You've got your own life to live. Do I? Cole turned to face her fully. Because I'm not sure I do anymore. Not one that makes sense, anyway. I've spent 20 years moving, and where has it gotten me? Older, no wiser, still carrying my father's last words like stones in my pockets. Cole? I lied to Owen. When he asked if I was staying, I told him I was a drifter. But truth is, I'm tired of drifting. Tired of walking away from places that might become home if I gave them a chance. His voice dropped lower. Tired of walking away from people who might become family if I let them. Martha's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying this ranch needs someone who knows how to fix fences and patch roofs and handle cattle. I'm saying those children need someone who can teach Owen to shoot straight and help Nell learn her letters. I'm saying... He stopped, took a breath. I'm saying you shouldn't have to do this alone anymore. Not if you don't want to. I barely know you. You know I'll stand when others run. You know I'll fight for what's right, even when it's dangerous. You know I care about you and your children enough to risk my life for them. Cole's eyes were steady on hers. What else do you need to know? Martha thought about Thomas, about the love they'd built over 15 years of marriage, about the way he'd held her on their wedding night, promising forever, about the children they'd made together, the dreams they'd shared, and she thought about the fact that Thomas was gone, that forever had ended in a shallow grave by the creek, that holding on to his memory so tightly meant closing herself off from any future that didn't include him. I loved my husband, she said carefully. I know. And I'll always love him. There'll always be a part of my heart that belongs to him and what we had. I wouldn't want it any other way. Cole's voice was gentle. I'm not asking to replace him, Martha. I'm asking to stand beside you as we both figure out what comes next. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose and deep purple. The ranch lay quiet around them, scarred by fire but still standing, still theirs. Stay, Martha said. Not as a drifter passing through, not as hired help. Stay as... She searched for the right word, the one that captured what this could be. Stay as partner. Help me run this ranch, raise these children, build something that lasts. You sure? No. I'm terrified. But I'm also tired of being alone, tired of pretending I can do everything myself. Martha managed a small smile. And Owen already likes you better than he likes me most days. Cole's answering smile was real, warm, transforming his weathered face. Then I guess I'm staying. They stood together as darkness settled over the valley, two people who'd found each other at exactly the moment they both needed finding. It wasn't the romance of storybooks. It was something more honest than that, partnership born of shared hardship, respect earned through crisis, and the simple recognition that some fights were better fought together. The barn raising happened the following Saturday, the entire valley turning out with lumber and nails and determined goodwill. By sunset, the frame was up, the roof half shingled, the promise of completion visible in the structure rising from the ashes. Children ran between the workers, including Owen and Nell, their laughter a sound Martha had thought she might never hear again. Cole worked alongside the other men, his movements sure and practiced, his quiet competence earning nods of approval from ranchers who'd spent lifetimes judging character by how a man handled a hammer. During a water break, Edith Mercer sidled up to Martha and gestured at Cole with her chin. That one's a keeper. We'll see. Already seeing, if the way he looks at you is any indication. Edith's eyes twinkled. Thomas would approve, you know. He'd want you to be happy, to have help, to not carry everything alone. You didn't even know Thomas that well. Knew him well enough. Good man, good neighbor, good father. Men like that don't leave behind instructions to mourn forever. They leave behind hope that the people they loved will keep living, keep building, keep choosing joy when they can find it. Martha watched Cole helping Owen measure a board, the boy's face serious as he tried to do it exactly right, Cole's patience evident in the way he guided without taking over. It's too soon. People will talk. People always talk. Question is whether you let that stop you from living. Edith patted Martha's arm. Life's short and hard out here. Grab happiness where you find it. By the time the barn was finished 2 weeks later, walls solid, roof tight, fresh paint bright against the Montana sky, something had shifted. Not just in the physical landscape of the ranch, but in the emotional one. Cole had a bedroll in the barn, but he took meals at the cabin table. He taught Owen to ride properly, to handle livestock, to think 3 steps ahead when working the land. He carved Nell a new doll from cottonwood, painted its face with careful strokes, presented it with a ceremony that made the little girl glow. And he talked to Martha. Really talked. About his childhood in Missouri, about the years of drifting, about the mistakes and regrets and small moments of grace that had kept him human through all of it. She told him about her family in Ohio, about choosing Thomas over security, about the fear and joy of frontier life. They didn't rush into anything, didn't make grand declarations or promises they weren't ready to keep. Just moved forward one day at a time, finding their rhythm, building something new from the rubble of what had been lost. 3 months after the fire, on a cool autumn morning when the aspen leaves had turned to gold and the air smelled of coming winter, Cole appeared at the cabin door with something in his hand. Martha was kneading bread, her hands white with flour, when he knocked. "Got something for you," he said, suddenly awkward in a way she'd never seen him. "What is it?" He opened his palm. Nestled there was a ring, simple gold, worn smooth with age, clearly valuable despite its plainness. "It was my mother's. Only thing of hers I kept. I know it's too soon, I know you might not be ready, but I wanted you to have it. Not necessarily as a proposal, just as a promise that I'm here, that I'm staying, that when you are ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be waiting." Martha stared at the ring, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. It was too soon. Everyone would talk. What would Thomas think? But Thomas was gone. And Cole was here. And her children were happy for the first time since their father died. And she was happy, or at least the closest to happy she'd been in months. Was that enough? Was that worth reaching for? She held out her hand, flower and all. Cole slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "I'm not asking for an answer today," he said quietly. "Just asking you to think about it. About a future where you're not alone, where the children have someone to help raise them, where this ranch has 2 people fighting for it instead of 1. "I don't need to think about it." Martha looked up at him, at this good man who'd stumbled into her life and chosen to stay. "Yes? Yes, you'll think about it, or, yes, I'll marry you, when you're ready to ask properly, when the children are ready, when it feels right instead of rushed." She smiled. "But yes, the answer's yes." Cole pulled her into his arms, careful of the flower, and kissed her forehead with a tenderness that made tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a reason to stop running." They married the following spring, in a simple ceremony beside the creek where Thomas was buried. It felt right somehow, to start this new chapter in the presence of the man who'd come before. Owen stood up with Cole as a kind of best man, his chest puffed with importance. Nell scattered wildflowers, singing under her breath. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony, his voice carrying authority and warmth in equal measure. Edith Mercer and half the valley stood witness, their presence a reminder that community had saved Martha when she'd been at her lowest point. "Do you, Martha Caldwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward?" Martha looked at Cole, at the life they'd already started building together, at the future stretching ahead of them, uncertain but no longer terrifying. "I do." "And do you, Cole Ryder, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Cole, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief, almost chaste, mindful of the children watching. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was the beginning of something Martha had thought she'd never have again: hope. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful: food and music and laughter, the kind of frontier wedding that prioritized community over ceremony. As the sun set and the party wound down, Martha found herself standing at the edge of the gathering, watching her children play with the neighbor kids, watching Cole talk with the ranchers who'd become friends and allies. Edith appeared beside her with 2 cups of punch. "Happy?" "Getting there." Martha accepted the cup. "It's strange, isn't it, how quickly life can change. 6 months ago, I was about to lose everything. Now I'm married again, the ranch is thriving, the children are healthy. That's frontier life. One day you're dying, next day you're dancing. Trick is to appreciate the dancing while you can." Edith clinked her cup against Martha's. "To new beginnings." To new beginnings. As summer returned to the valley, the same brutal, beautiful Montana summer that had tested Martha so severely a year before, the ranch bloomed with life and purpose. The rebuilt barn stood strong, filled with hay and healthy livestock. The garden produced more than they could eat, the excess traded with neighbors or preserved for winter. The children grew taller, stronger, happier. Cole proved himself every day in the quiet ways that mattered, fixing things before they broke, teaching Owen the skills he'd need to run the ranch someday, making Nell laugh with terrible jokes and elaborate stories. He worked from dawn until dusk, rebuilding what the fire had destroyed and creating things that had never existed before. A proper henhouse, a smoke shed, a porch addition where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun paint the mountains gold. One afternoon in late July, Martha found him in the barn, working on something at the makeshift workbench he'd built. She approached quietly, curious what had occupied him for the past 3 days. "Almost done," he said without looking up. "Just need to smooth out this last edge." Martha peered over his shoulder and caught her breath. A wooden horse, delicately carved, white paint gleaming, mane and tail flowing as if caught in mid-gallop. It was beautiful, detailed, clearly made with painstaking care. "It's for Nell," Cole said. "She's been talking about that white horse I ride, says it's magic. Figured she should have her own magic horse." "Cole, it's beautiful. When did you learn to carve like this?" "My father taught me. Before everything went bad. It was how he relaxed after long days with the real horses. I haven't done it in years, but I thought—" He paused, ran his hand along the horse's back. "I thought it might be nice to pass something down. Something that isn't pain or loss." Martha wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressed her face between his shoulder blades. "You're a good man, Cole Ryder. I'm trying to be. For you, for the kids, for the life we're building." That evening, Cole presented the horse to Nell with all the ceremony it deserved. Her face lit up like sunrise, her small hands reverently touching the carved mane, the painted eyes, the flowing tail. "It's magic," she breathed. "Real magic." "Course it is," Cole said seriously. "All good things are magic if you look at them right." Owen, not to be left out, received something equally precious. Cole's own knife, the one his father had given him decades ago. "You're old enough now to have real responsibility. This knife's seen me through a lot of years, a lot of miles. I'm trusting you to treat it with respect, to use it for building, not breaking." Owen held the knife like a holy relic, his eyes wide. "I will. I promise." As the children played with their gifts, Martha and Cole sat on the porch watching the sun set over land that had almost been stolen from them, but now stood secure, protected by law and community, and two people who'd chosen to fight rather than flee. "Do you ever regret it?" Martha asked quietly. "Giving up the drifting life? You could be anywhere right now, seeing new places, answering to no one." Cole considered the question, his eyes on the distant mountains. "I saw a lot of places. Most of them looked the same after a while, just different dirt under the same sky. And answering to no one sounds free until you realize it means no one's waiting for you either. No one cares if you come back or not." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. This is what I was looking for all those years without knowing it. A place to stand, people to stand with, a future that matters. Even when it's hard? Even when the cattle get sick or the crops fail or winter comes early? Especially then. Hard means it matters. Hard means we're building something real. He squeezed her hand. "Besides, you think drifting was easy? Try sleeping on frozen ground with nothing but a thin blanket and your horse's breath for warmth. Try eating hardtack for 3 weeks straight. This life might be hard, but it's a hell of a lot better than what I was doing before." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the valley, the children's laughter drifting from inside where they played before bedtime. Somewhere a coyote called, lonely and wild. The creek sang its endless song. The ranch breathed around them, alive and theirs. This was no fairy tale ending. There would be hard winters ahead, lean times, struggles they couldn't yet imagine. But there would also be springs and harvests and children growing tall. There would be mornings breaking gold over the mountains and evenings spent on this porch, watching their world turn beautiful in the fading light. Martha had lost everything once, her husband, her security, her belief that hard work guaranteed safety. She'd nearly lost her home, her children, her will to keep fighting. But she'd found something too. She'd found strength she didn't know she possessed. She'd found community in a valley that had seemed lonely and indifferent. She'd found a partner in a drifter who'd stopped drifting. And she'd found, against all odds and all sense, that life could begin again even after it seemed to have ended, that love could bloom in ashes, that hope could survive fire. The burning summer had passed. What rose from its remains was sweeter for having been tested, stronger for having been forged in flame. A ranch, a family, a future built on burnt ground but reaching always toward light. This was home, this was family. This was the life Martha Caldwell, now Martha Ryder, had fought for and won. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.